So I just want to introduce you to Kelvin Newman, man behind the Brighton SEO conference. It's probably one of the most popular conferences here in Europe. What do you think, Kelvin?
Well, yeah, it's a big old event. People seem to a great opportunity for people to get together. So there's 1,700 people come along, and last time round the tickets sold out in 4.5 minutes. So yeah, it's a popular event, which is it's nice to see. People like getting together and sharing what they know, and I think that's kind of what we've always been about with the event. It's about people getting up, sharing something that they've learned, and hopefully everyone taking something away and being able to do SEO a little bit better, really.
It's what I would think, but yesterday we have Australian here for webinar. I asked him Brighton SEO, and Australian didn't hear about that, which is, well, strange. I talked to a few Pakistani SEO guys and Indian today, and nobody knows about Brighton SEO. For me, I was a gobsmacked, to be honest with you. So, go on.
Yeah, maybe we ought to do more to promote it. It's a strange one in the sense that because the tickets sell so quickly, we often don't do as much as we perhaps should do to let new people know about it. So yeah, hopefully, it's always good to get the word out there, and we're always glad to see new people coming along who've not been before.
Okay, the last one just finished. What was it? A couple of weeks ago, or even less?
Yeah, it was the
2015.
Yeah, I think it was 2 weeks yesterday. 2 weeks tomorrow. So yeah, it's not so long. We do it twice a year, so it's back again on the 22nd of April.
You have it twice a year. Okay, so why somebody told me the next one is going to be April? Is it? Okay, so twice. Okay, I have April 22nd. So just book your tickets for Brighton SEO. Brilliant city of Brighton. Okay, I guess as would be it, if somebody will come, yes, they will lose a little bit. So I'm going to go through this my little presentation because I spent some time on doing it. I have to show it. Okay, Kelvin Newman, how to have less rubbish idea. Oh, interesting. Let's see what else. Okay, it's Brighton SEO as we said, as photo of Brighton. Yeah. Okay, pitch. Okay. He went to University of Sussex and graduated. And this is my fault. He doesn't live in London. He lives still in Brighton. My fault, guys. But the photo is obviously made in London. Okay. Okay, rough agenda. He will tell you everything about it. I guess he's founder and managing director of Rough Agenda company, which is behind the Brighton SEO conference. And this is the best photo, I think. Okay, Kelvin, it's all yours. I'm switching my presentation off, and I'll switching my camera off as well.
Fantastic. Hopefully, all come through nice and clearly. So yeah, thanks very much, everybody, for joining me today. I'm going to be talking a little bit about how to have less rubbish ideas, is the title I've gone with, but it's all about the kind of the idea generation process, the process of coming up with ideas, because I think actually that's so much at the heart of what particularly link building, but kind of any digital marketing really is involved about. So what I will say today, that a lot of what I'm going to say isn't profound. It isn't necessarily even something that will be new to you. But what I hope I'm going to be able to do is kind of nudge you into thinking a little bit differently, maybe doing things a little bit differently, which I think kind of could change your life, which I think is kind of a reasonably ambitious approach to what I'm going to try and do is change your life a little bit over the course of this presentation. So the presentation itself, it's kind of 3 different stories. So I wanted to share with you 3 different stories, all of which I think have lessons, which help us in the task of coming up with creative ideas, particularly creative content ideas. So the first of those is what's known as the Scunthorpe problem. So that's my first story. I'll come to that in a second. The second story is an unlikely hero. And then the third story is an evolving machine. So they're the 3 different stories I'm going to go through. Each of them, I think, have a connection to creativity, to digital marketing, and clear lessons that I think we could take from them. So my outcome, the hope that I'll get by the end of this session that I've got with you this afternoon, is that you have better ideas, and better ideas come when you understand your context, when you have some reliable methods, and when you create the right environment to have those ideas. So the first of those stories, the Scunthorpe problem. So this story takes place in 1996. So we're going to take a bit of a step back in time and take you to 1996 here in the UK. So Robbie Williams just left the popular boy band Take That. At the same point in time, Princess Diana and Prince Charles had just got divorced. Dolly the sheep had just been cloned. And you couldn't move anywhere in the UK without coming across AOL Online CD-ROMs. They were literally everywhere. And this particular Scunthorpe problem took place in 1996. There was an interesting situation whereby in 1996, Scunthorpe, which is a town in the UK, no customer could sign up for AOL online because of a rude word that was hidden in the town's name. They had a filter on that prevented anyone in that town from signing up because it had the rude word in their name, despite the fact that Scunthorpe's a relatively popular place. And the lesson behind this, to a certain extent, is that context is really important, right? If you're from outside the UK, you wouldn't necessarily know that Scunthorpe was a place. You might not necessarily even recognise the swear word that's there. It's kind of, the more that you can understand about the context in which something occurs, the better you understand that problem and the better equipped you are to have creative ideas around that. So, what does that mean? Well, I've got a good example of this. So one of the most successful SEO campaigns I think I've ever worked on was where we were able to get on Google UK a #1 ranking for bingo. Now at the time I was incredibly chuffed with myself. It's the kind of keyword that you'd put on your CV, you talk about with your friends in the industry. But the reality was, I've only really kind of come to realise later, was actually the reason we were #1 was because other people were no longer #1. What had happened was other people had gone down rather than necessarily we'd gone up. And it's only when you kind of understand that context, understand that that's the case, that you're really able to kind of, really do good work. Because fundamentally, the web is a network as well. That we understand this, that there's links. The quality of the links that point to your site are only determined by the links that they themselves have. The credibility that someone has when they share your share your content on social media is only determined by the the credibility that other people place in them. So you need to kind of understand this context, understand the network, understand that it's more than just one website linking to another. Because everything that we do happens in context. The more we can understand that context, the better chance we have of having a good idea, right? So if you know what's been successful, you know what's worked, you know the patterns behind things, you're in a much better place to respond to that. So what I wanted to do was show you a really simple way of doing that. There's lots of tools out there that do this type of thing, but they're often bundled into expensive SEO platforms. So what you can do is using Google Fusion tables, entirely free. You need a little bit of kind of access to link building tools, but using those, you can visualize link relationships. You can start to kind of get a network graph of the connections between different websites. Now, this is lifted from a great blog post by Joe Crowther, which I've got the link for there, which I really recommend having a look at. So essentially what you do is you choose your 5 websites. In my particular example, so I was looking at websites that ranked in the UK for the keyword sofa. And I didn't just want the top 5, I wanted kind of a variety of websites across different levels of rankings. Because actually, often you'll find, particularly in competitive sectors, because everyone's doing so much backlink analysis, the top performers, they tend to cluster and you don't get a huge amount of variation there. I want to look at the broader industry. I ran them through, my favourite link analysis tools. Ideally, I recommend those that happen to sponsor the conference I organise. But in this particular one, I used Moz. And what I did was I kind of combined all of the reports. So I looked at all of those 5 different websites, combined them into one CSV file, put in an additional field that showed this link goes to this website. And then, so I've got kind of a link, the website links to, and then for 5 different websites, all of their links, put them all into one CSV file. You end up with a spreadsheet, something a bit like the one we've got here. So the first column you've got is where the link's pointing towards. The second one is where the link occurs. Then a few other fields about that. And I'll just skip to the end there. It's a nightmare, sorry. I'll just come back to my slides in a sec. Okay, here we go. Just a second. I'll back to where I was. Apologies on that side of things. Okay, so you get your spreadsheet, you go to Fusion Tables, you bung it into Fusion Tables, you put you'll end up with something a bit like this. You then press the button that adds a chart. then in that chart, you start to get a network graph a bit like this. You can add some of the fields, and then before you know it, this is dead simple. I'm simplifying it just because we've not got a lot of time here this afternoon. But it's a really straightforward step-by-step process. It'll make a huge amount of sense to you when you're doing it. And you start to get network graphs like this, right? This is the start of it. So I can see that the Daily Mail had linked to loaf.com and Furniture Village. I can start to see these connections, to see these nodes in the network that are linking to and referencing lots of different websites. And these are the type of people I really want to be building relationships. These are the people I really want to be sharing my content, because they're already linking to a couple of my competitors. We know that there's the power to link there. We know that it's influential, but we understand that the search engines will know that the Daily Mail can act as a kind of a connector between these different websites. So hopefully what I've demonstrated there with the story, but also the approach, is that you can have better ideas when you understand your context, right? All kinds of different contexts, but talking about particularly link building there. Okay, on to my second story. So this one's called An Unlikely Hero. And I want to tell you a few of my heroes, a few of the people that I'm big fans of. I'm a big fan of Ira Glass, who's the presenter of This American Life, an incredible podcast. If you don't listen to that, you should. It can teach you so much about all kinds of things. Dave Trott, who's an exceptional thinker about advertising and creativity. I'm a big fan of these two guys. On the left-hand side, there's Danny Baker, who's a really exceptional broadcaster here in the UK. David Hepworth, who started some of my favourite magazines. And of course, Wayne and Garth from Wayne's World, who are very much the inspiration, their Wayne Stock event for Brighton SEO. But one that perhaps might not be quite so obvious to people is this chap, who you may not recognise. So this is Dong Guyan. And Dong Guyan is behind a really incredibly successful cultural phenomenon, which is Flappy Bird. Now, I think Flappy Bird's really interesting. And the success of Flappy Bird's really interesting because it can teach us things about creative ideas. So Flappy Bird, when you really break it down, it's really just kind of a combination of some of the elements of Angry Bird, some of the gameplay of Pong, some of the graphic design elements of Super Mario. And what you've got there is you bring those three ideas together and you create Flappy Bird. Bringing together ideas leads to creativity. I think James Webb Young, who's referenced so much at the most recent Brighton SEO, puts this really well. He says, an idea is nothing more nor less than a new combination of old elements. So I actually think that the best SEO tool costs less than a fiver. I think that you can have the best SEO results if you can get some post-it notes and some Sharpies and kind of come up with some good ideas. You don't necessarily always need expensive tools. It's about that creative idea process. Now, I want to share with you a particular approach that I've used that's worked quite well. It's got a very kind of overly flowery name, but it's called the heuristic ideation technique. And this is, again, it's picked up from a book called Game Storm that I recommend really highly. Now, I think that's a little bit, I like flashy things, but I think I prefer an idea of Chindogu, which is kind of similar. So Chindogu is a Japanese cultural idea where basically combining two different things together to create new inventions. So it's two things that shouldn't be connected. So here you have a baby grow, which also cleans the floor as the baby crawls around your house. So that's an example of Chindogu. So whether you call it heuristic ideation technique or Chindogu, whichever you do, I think this is a really powerful process. And this idea, this process, is based upon three ideas, right? So this is based upon that a new idea can be generated by remixing the attributes of an existing idea. So you can create new ideas by remixing things about old ideas. That a new idea can be best understood by describing two of its essential attributes. And that the more surprising that combination of attributes, the more compelling the idea. So if you believe those three things, this is a really good process. So what you do is you get something a bit like this. So this is the example they use in game storming, where essentially what you do is you're trying to create a matrix. So along the top here, you've got types. So imagine you're a toy company trying to come up with a new idea for a brand new toy. So along the top there, you've got types of toy. So a vehicle, dolls, puzzles, and instruments. They're all different types of toys. Then down the other side, you've got types of play. So racing is a type of play, simulation is a type of play, construction is a type of play. Then we take those two ideas and try and combine them together. So a racing vehicle is a pretty obvious one. You might have a slot cars, all kinds of things there. What would a racing doll look like? What would a racing puzzle look like? What would a racing instrument look like? Or what would a construction doll look like? Or a construction puzzle look like? So what we're doing here is some of these ideas are really obvious, like they're kind of racing vehicles, but others are kind of more unusual. And this process of kind of taking your ideas, combining them together, can come up with some really interesting and sometimes entirely novel approaches to problems. And I think you can use that in kind of content marketing all the time. So from a straightforward perspective, you could maybe do something like this, where you maybe have different personas, and then down one side, you've got different formats of content. So you kind of go, well, what's a blog post I could write for one type of your customer? What's a blog post you could do for a second type of customer? What's a podcast you could do for them? That can work quite well. You could maybe do things like this, actually. So rather than formats, it's like, what could I do? What could I create as a piece of content for persona 1 that makes them look good? Or what could I do for persona group 1 that makes them laugh or makes them angry? I think emotions like that can work well. Or maybe you can start to go like this. Well, how can I create a vine that makes them laugh? How can I create a tweet that makes them laugh? How can I create a presentation? And kind of basically, there's no limit on how you can use these types of approach, right? So what you've got here is you're taking two different things, combining them together. It helps you create good ideas. Because frameworks are really powerful because they help you narrow the brief. Right? I think the worst situation you can have as a digital marketer is you go into a room and say, here's a blank sheet of paper, I need to come up with some ideas. It's too open-ended. They narrow the brief and it allows the creativity to be easier because there's a framework there behind that. And that's potentially hugely powerful when you get these situations. You're working on a pitch, or your bosses come to you and say, okay, I need 5 great content blog post ideas for tomorrow. It kind of removes some of the limitless scope to narrow things down, and you'd be surprised about the quality of ideas that will come off the back of that. So I hope now you agree with me when I say you have better ideas when you understand your context, but you also have better ideas when you have some reliable methods. What your methods are might vary from mine. It's important to have them to understand how you come up with the ideas that come off the back of that. Okay, so on to my third story. So this is called An Evolving Machine. And I think that Google's algorithm is a perfect example of a complex and chaotic system. It's so intricate and interrelated that no one person could take it apart. I don't know if the video is going to work here on that side of things. The way that we tend to think it works is a bit like there's a famous Honda advert. And in this Honda advert, what happens is, it's almost like a domino effect where one thing happens and that thing's happened. Most people, the way they think about how search engines work, they think that they could take them apart, understand them, and put them back together again. When the reality is it's very unlike that. Instead, it's more like a really busy traffic junction where you've probably seen these traffic junctions where there's no lights, there's no roundabouts, there's no rules, but it just seems to work. You couldn't reverse engineer it. That's definitely what I think how Google works. So this is another story that takes place in 1996. This was at the University of Sussex a few years before I got there, and it's in their Department of Informatics. Now, in that particular department, there was a chap called Dr. Adrian Thompson, and he worked in the Evolutionary and Adaptive Systems group. And he kind of had this, scientific project that he was working on. He was asking himself, could a circuit evolve to solve a problem? Could he use natural selection applied to a circuit to solve a particular problem? So what he did was apply survival of the fittest to circuits. He tried to, the test was, here are 2 different sounds, are they the same or are they different? That was the test the circuit could do. And if you're into electronics, it's not necessarily a hugely difficult circuit to create, but could you evolve a circuit starting from a blank circuit board into something that would, give you that result? And the first 100 generations that they had, where they were starting from random, were a little better than random guesses, right? They weren't very, very good at solving this particular problem. But by generation 220, they were starting to see some encouraging signs, but it seemed to be learning the different, the circuits were getting better. By generation 1400, it had a 50% success rate, and by 4000, they had generation 4000, they'd evolved a circuit that could tell the difference between these 2 particular tones. But this circuit that evolved over time by taking each generation and improving on it slightly, something strange happened. Because what happened is the circuit solved the problem using 37 logic gates. 5 logic cells were connected in ways which wouldn't allow them to influence how the circuit works. So if you as a human being designed it, they're like dead ends of the circuit. They shouldn't have any influence on how the circuit worked whatsoever. However, if you remove them, the chip stopped working. right? So these elements of this circuit that should have no influence on how the system works, when you remove them, the circuit stopped working. And I think the lessons here is that when machines teach themselves, they solve problems in ways we can't reverse engineer. Now, I think Google are fundamentally a machine learning company, right? And so what's this got to do with search, really? Well, Google, I think their purpose isn't to be a search engine or to be an advertising company. Really what they're about is monetizing machine learning, monetizing how you can use algorithms to understand people and the world. That's really what I think they're about. So, Sergey can't understand how Google works. Matt Cutts can't understand how Google works. And fundamentally, I haven't got a clue, right? Because machine learning, because there's so many parts involved, we can't take it apart. We can't fully understand how the algorithm works. But that's interesting, right? Because, if I profess to be an SEO expert, I'm supposed to know what I'm talking about, right? How can you reconcile this situation whereby your job is to know how Google works, yet the system, the way that it works, I believe, makes it impossible for anyone to truly understand how it works. Now, there's a really interesting article that I recommend really highly because it's on The Guardian here in the UK, and it's called, the title of the piece is "Everyone is just totally winging it all the time." And the article talks about the fact that actually, in all walks of life, in all kinds of organisations, whether even when people appear to really know what they're doing, the reality is that behind the scenes, people are making it up as they go along. And I think this summed up really well from this particular quote from it. So this is Oliver Burtman who wrote that particular piece. "I've often thought of my experience of adulthood thus far as one of incrementally discovering there's no institution or walk of life in which everyone is totally winging it all the time." Right? So, and this is kind of when I've done this, talked about this in the past, I'd kind of go to the audience, get them to put up my hand. So I might kind of ask you if you can put it in the chat box here. So who here would say that they're better than average at driving? Right, a few of you maybe. What happens is typically about 70 or 80% of people put their hands up. That can't be true, right? 50% of you have to be worse than average. That's how kind of averages tend to work. We're really poor at assessing our own abilities and things, both upward and downward. So you get what's known as the Dunning-Kruger effect. So that's a cognitive bias where relatively unskilled individuals suffer from illusionary superiority and mistakenly assess their ability to be much higher than is accurate. So generally speaking, when you're not very good at things, you tend to think you're better at them. You see that a lot in SEO as well. But there's an opposite, a corollary to that, kind of an opposite to that, which is kind of what's known as imposter syndrome. So this is, again, a psychological phenomenon which people are unable to internalize their accomplishments. So despite external evidence that might prove their competence, those with the syndrome, not everybody has this, but a lot of people do, those with the syndrome remain convinced that they're frauds and do not deserve the success that they've achieved. This is really common. You need to understand that, you may or may not suffer from imposter syndrome. I do, lots of people do. Regardless of whether you do, there will be people in your team, there will be people you're working with who, entirely believe that they're not as good as they could be, which is a real shame on that side of things. And I think Bertrand Russell sums this up really well. So the trouble with the world is that the stupid are cocksure and the intelligent are full of doubt. And like I say, super common. Mike Myers, says he suffers from imposter syndrome. Kate Winslet, Neil Gaiman, even Albert Einstein suffered from imposter syndrome. The exaggerated esteem in which my life's work is held makes me very ill at ease. I feel compelled to think of myself as an involuntary swindler. All kinds of great people do that. So what I hope I'm starting to get across here is that good ideas are really hard to come by. And the reality is that in many cases, you'll think your ideas are shit. You'll think that your ideas aren't up to scratch. That's inevitable in many cases. So you really need to know yourself and understand what it is about yourself that allows you to be creative. If your job is to be a creative person, it's kind of, it's the opposite of the Dunning-Kruger effect. But you really need to know yourself to do well, right? So you need to kind of understand the environment in which you're most likely to be successful. You need to create the right environment that's going to be successful. It continues to amaze me that people will kind of go, okay, in this meeting where I just told you off 15 minutes ago for not doing your timesheets on time, this is the same room I want you to kind of come up with the next creative idea that's going to change the business and the world. It just doesn't necessarily work like that. And I don't mean that changing the context has to mean dream pods or flotation tanks or anything like that. It's just about kind of knowing. For some people, they have the best ideas when they go for a run. Some people have the best ideas when they're walking and talking. For me, it's kind of one where I often have the best ideas. So I kind of lock myself away in a pub and work for an hour or two. That tends to work the best for me on that side of things. I've got a weird one as well that kind of annoys people in the office. I kind of often have a softball or a cricket ball, which I'll throw between my hands. I have to try and make a decision. That kind of helps. It's weird. It makes no sense, but it helps me in that particular environment. There'll be things like that you can do. Embrace them in yourself and encourage people to, understand what it is that helps them be creative, because that will help them do a better job. And ultimately, I think there's 3 great books here that are really kind of applicable to what we've talked about here today. So the first of those is by Dr. Steve Peters. He was the psychologist who helped the GB cycling team go on to win a huge number of Olympic medals and also the Tour de France. Game Storming has loads of those exercises, loads of those processes which can take you from the blank sheet of paper to some great ideas. And also The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. It's one of the few business books out there which genuinely talks about failure and talks about when things don't necessarily go as well as they could. So what I hope I've done over the 25 minutes or so that I've been talking to you is convince you that you have better ideas when you understand your context, that you have better ideas when you have some reliable methods, and you have better ideas when you create the right kind of environment. Thanks very much for your time. I've really enjoyed it. I hope you guys have as well.